The following is a Spirit Street production.
Well, in the world of conference realignment in which we live, it's hard to find reliable information. But the guy we have today was pretty damn reliable last year when the Pac-12 was facing imminent doom. And today we're going to talk to Jason Scheer about that and look forward to what's happening in the ACC, because the man also had something to say about that recently. This is the Big 12 Insiders. Big B's on vacation. I'm Fitz. Here we go.
Welcome to the Big 12 Insiders, your Big 12 sports show, presented by Synergy Financial Partners. Now let's go to booming North Texas, home of Studio 73. Here's your host, Brien Hanley.
I'm not Brien Hanley. Jason Scheer, I need to get my own open. I run this thing. Why don't I have my own open?
You need one already.
I know. I got to talk to management. I'm management. How you doing, my friend?
Doing well. How about you?
I'm good. I'm hanging in there. There's so much to cover here. I appreciate you doing the show today. And let's go back in time. Let's start there. You pretty much not predicted, you reported what was going to happen to the Pac-12 early in the situation. You were on top of it. I don't know who your source is, but it's very good. How much heat did you take from your fellow members of the media last year for being right?
Quite a bit. Yeah, quite a bit. It was, I don't think I've ever reported. I mean, I've broken stuff before, but not on that scale. And I haven't been around a situation like that at the time. It caught me completely off guard. I didn't think anything of it before I started to tweet out information. And the more information I tweeted out, the more attention it got and the more ridicule and all that came along with it.
How satisfying was it? I guess it's hard to be satisfied when your conference falls apart, but you were right. It had to kind of feel redeeming.
Yeah, it did. The one day that really felt redeeming was basically the day that it was announced. I was on my way, believe it or not, to my birthday dinner, and my wife picked up her phone and saw some alerts, and kind of sat there at a red light, and I said, thank God, because if I was wrong, it would have ended up poorly for me, and it was a relief, and it was a relief that it was kind of over at that time, and I could shift back to normal stuff.
Yeah, it was a tense moment. I mean, there was so much misinformation coming out. I agree that fans had a problem trying to sort through it all. But in the end, it was the Pac-12 spreading a bunch of misinformation. And we later found out that George Kliavkoff was basically lying at points in this whole process about where he was with the media deal.
Yeah. I mean, it was, up until the end, it was a lie. And there were schools that were trying to make it seem, Oregon and Washington, for instance, like they made it seem like they were trying when everyone in the room knew that they weren't. That's why the meeting happened. And then an hour later, these schools are gone. They knew, they knew, despite what George said, what Kliavkoff said, they knew that there would be no deal. And he kept trying to buy time and said, I'm real close. But at their heart, they knew that he wasn't all that close. And eventually it's like, well, you have to show me something. And so they said, you got to show me. And magically there wasn't really anything to be shown, as they suspected. And that was kind of the beginning of the end.
He kicked the can so far down the road, he ran out of road. I mean, I couldn't believe the amount of delay tactics he used to have nothing. I mean, I don't know what he thought he was going to do, because he literally had no media deal.
Yeah, I mean, he just kept delaying, and I think a part of him said, look, if I delay long enough and I wait long enough, these companies and all that, they're going to come to me, and I'm going to be able to raise the price a little bit. But that's just not how it works. Like Apple at the time, that was his ace in the hole, but they're not dying to add sports content, and there's even more proof of that now. They just don't really pay attention to it very much. So that deal never got to where he probably told the member schools it was going to get to.
Well, in hindsight now, you were right. The Pac-12 dissolved, but that's sad. I mean, it was a great conference to see it ripped to pieces because of inept leadership, not just at the conference level, but the campus level, it was kind of inevitable, but it's also not fun. That's not cool. I mean, I as much as the Big 12 benefited from that, it also is incredibly sad for fans of the Pac-12.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from California, so I grew up on the Pac-12. I went to UCLA games and USC games growing up, and that's what I was around. And I think one of the misconceptions is that I was rooting for the end of the Pac-12 when I was kind of just rooting for Arizona to get the best deal, whether that was in the Pac-12 or the Big 12 or whatever it was. And I think you nailed it. Like the only reason the conference didn't stay afloat was the ineptitude and the arrogance of its leadership. Had they merged with the Big 12 or expanded or whatever you want to call it, they're not in this position. And the presidents that wound up leaving were the same ones that said the other schools were beneath them. And so, I always go back to when USC just refused to have those conversations and had one foot out the door at the time, and nobody else picked up on it. And so, it's sad. Like there's a lot of great players. There's a lot of great legacy that has come through the Pac-12, and now it's kind of just gone.
Now the Four Corner schools are in the Big 12. Give me your early perception about how Arizona and its other Pac-12 mates fit into this conference.
The one thing one of the things I took away from Media Day in Vegas was that Arizona fit. Like it just felt like a cultural fit. It felt very comfortable. Like it wasn't necessarily new. I guess you could say that about the other schools as well, but I was more focused on Arizona at the time, and it felt good, right? Like the other coaches seemed to be accepting of it. No one's really up in arms about playoff spots or anything like that, like you might see in some other conferences. And it's exciting. Like I think that's the key too, is that there was just a lot of excitement surrounding Media Day and Arizona's future in the Big 12.
Yeah, I think the four additions are a great fit. But I'm going to put you on the spot here. During your reporting, did you hear anything about Utah and the Big Ten? Or, they have been so reluctant in this entire process, and I'm still hearing they expect to be in the Big Ten very soon. And I honestly, buddy, I don't see that at all.
I don't see it. I think in an ideal world, maybe Utah wants to be in the Big Ten, but I haven't heard them come up with that at all. I think they're pretty locked in with the Big 12, from what I understand, financially and just in general. I don't think there's a spot for them in the Big 10 or the SEC or any of that.
Yeah, it kind of feels like all the attention now has turned to the ACC, and look, conferences are at 16 or 18. That's enough. We don't need more, but that seems to be where it's headed. And again, I'm in the position where I'm reporting stuff, the possible scenarios if Florida State and Clemson leave, and you put something out too. Nobody's rooting for the ACC, at least in reporters, the community of reporters. We're not rooting for it to fall apart, but boy, Jason, I see some of the warning signs I saw a year ago with the Pac-12 taking place in the ACC.
Yeah, I hope the ACC stays together. I hope it does find a way. It just right now that path seems difficult, and like you said, it feels very similar to the early parts of the Pac-12 falling apart, where it's like schools are possibly looking to get out and no one really believes it, and then the further down the road it gets, you start to believe it a little bit more. And there's just so much legal stuff going on with the ACC that it's hard to tell the direction it's going in. But when you have members that aren't happy, it's hard to kind of get over that.
Yeah. Well, if you're the commissioner, you can just throw them under the train and have a whole speech about how you're standing up for the members when it's members you're talking about. I thought Jim Phillips's comments were strong, but kind of weird too. He was talking trash on two of his schools. Granted, it's not a pretty situation, but I thought the whole thing was really uncomfortable.
Yeah, the whole thing has been handled publicly poorly, in my opinion. Like Jim Phillips should be saying how much he values Florida State and Clemson, and Florida State and Clemson are clearly trying to get out of the conference, and Phillips obviously doesn't think they'll be able to. But it's a weird situation when it's like, haha, you're a member of the ACC because we're forcing you to be. Like, it's like, it feels weird. And I'm not sure any other conference is doing that right now, but that's literally the angle that the ACC is taking.
It's crazy. It's almost like their plan A is hold hostages. Let's lock them in the basement and not let them leave. And I just don't see how that's fundamentally good for a conference.
Yeah, I don't think it is either. And eventually these schools are just going to get madder and madder. And I mean, that's why they're in the courts trying to figure things out, and we'll see what happens there. And I think that'll lead to stronger opinions from one side or the other. But yeah, I mean, that the health of the ACC, despite what Philip said at media day, it's not good. And I just can't see the argument being made that, nothing. He kind of made it seem like, oh, nothing's wrong. We're going to get through this, just a little rough patch. But I think it's a little more than a rough patch right now.
Well, all the focus is on those two schools because they're the ones in court trying to escape the ACC. But there's an undertow of a lot of schools beginning to peek at that exit. They kind of keep looking over to it because they feel it's inevitable it comes apart. While we've all focused on Florida State and Clemson, there's a lot of talk about Louisville and other schools already making plans to be in the Big 12.
Yeah, I mean, look, if Florida State and Clemson get out of the ACC, it's game on. Right. I would say Miami, Louisville, NC State, Virginia Tech, they're all looking to get out too.
Yep.
And in terms of the Big 12 interest, I'd say Florida State and Clemson, as we know, and Miami and Louisville are probably the next two in line. But I think if the ACC breaks up, we're looking at a big national realignment in some way. I know the SEC and the Big Ten say they're not interested, but these teams have to go somewhere. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, this is just me talking, if the Pac-12 gets reassembled in that situation, because if you're Stanford, Cal, SMU, you just got to the ACC and now it's gone. So there's a lot. Should Florida State and Clemson be able to get out of the ACC, I think we're headed towards a whole nother round of realignment.
Yeah, it seems like the chances of those two schools actually ending up in the Big 12, which you've reported there have been some third-party discussions about that, and we always got to emphasize that. No, Brett Yormark's not sitting down with ADs and presidents right now. He's using consultants to talk to consultants that report back. But it seems like a narrow window for the Big 12 to land those two schools without total chaos happening and everyone wanting out. And then the Big 10 and SEC say, yeah, we'll take you now. Now that it's fallen apart, we'll take you. I just don't see a scenario in which those two schools stay on the table and neither one of those conferences want them.
Yeah. I mean, it would happen quickly. And that's the thing. Like, I could say right now, the Big 12 is confident in adding Florida State and Clemson eventually.
Right.
But there's so many things that have to happen, not only legally, but you basically have to assume that the SEC and the Big 10 don't want them. And then that's probably right there with the court proceedings, because if the SEC or the Big 10 say, we want you, Florida State, the Big 12, there's very little they can do unless the private equity money comes into play and all that. Now, I will say that, the Big 10, again, the commission said today that they're very happy with where they are. And he mentioned a few times AAU schools and things like that. And that very well could be a deciding factor. But I don't think they're just going to float out in the open. I think if they get out of their ACC contracts, we're going to know pretty quickly where Florida State and Clemson are headed.
Yeah. Look, the Big 10 always says you don't have to be AAU, but we're going to constantly talk about it and only seem to be interested in schools that are AAU. And you look at the SEC, well, they already have a presence in Florida and South Carolina, and they seem to be focused on extending their footprint. Let's be honest, despite what the TV ratings might be, North Carolina is the crown jewel of the ACC in terms of realignment.
Yeah, if you're the Big 10, you want North Carolina and Duke. Those are your top two. The AAU, the ratings, all that. I'm sure the SEC wants them as well. Florida State just kind of, it's an attractive product. Don't get me wrong. I think the Big 12 would be great to add them, but it's not what they used to be, right? Like
Right.
it used to be, a major brand. And while it's still a big brand, it's just geographically and financially, it's not what it used to be in the world of college athletics. And, the Big 12 would happily take them. But yeah, I mean, Duke and North Carolina are probably the priorities in that conference.
Yeah, absolutely. And poor Virginia's out there as a massive state school, and nobody's talking about them. But I think they might even be as high as number 2 on the pecking order for some of these conferences. Getting the state of Virginia's footprint would be enormous. But it's odd to me, Jason, that nobody talks about Virginia ever. We never hear anything about them, and yet the reality is probably the conferences and the TV partners are very interested in that school.
Yeah, and then you decide, do you want Virginia? Do you want Virginia Tech? Do you want both? And that's the thing also, if you take North Carolina, do you have to take NC State? I mean, those are the conversations that are going to come up once again, and that's why, I'm not convinced it's just going to be a 1 or 2 school add. You're going to have to add others and find ways to do that and deal with committees and in-state governments and all that. And it's going to be really, really interesting to see if it does get that far, how it kind of plays out.
We're going to take a break right now, and we're going to delve a little bit more into what's going on with conference realignment, and then turn our attention to Arizona and the Big 12. Oh, yeah, football's just around the corner. We'll get to that after this break on the Big 12 Insiders.
We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the mission is to change the way Americans plan for their financial future. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's return to Studio 73.
It's not Studio 73. If you're a Big B fan, you have to follow him on vacation, which means get a passport and go to Mexico. I'm Fitz. I'm sitting in for Big B this week, and we're joined by Jason Scheer of Wildcat Authority, who really made his presence known last year with some great reporting. First of all, Jason, on a personal and professional note, I want to thank you for your reporting. It's not easy to stand up against the heat of colleagues sometimes, thinking you're an idiot. Believe me, I am an idiot. I just don't want people to think that. But you did, and I'm happy for you. You emerged out the other side of it. But those aren't fun times. Even though you're right, something could go wrong with it. And I've been in that position. But luckily, it played out for you. On a personal note, I'm just happy for you because, man, that sucks to go through that. It really does.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I will say for as much negative stuff, there's people like you that also have reached out with a lot of positive things to say as well, and it was all worth it. I would do it all over again. I'm confident. I was confident at the time of the reporting, and even though I took a lot of crap, there are also people that enjoyed the coverage and reached out, and so that made it all much easier to report along the way.
Yeah, those are weird situations. You've got a great source. You're right. And yet you could be wrong the next day. I mean, because if Oregon and Washington say, oh, we're going to stay, which happened with the Big 12 at one point, 4 schools were headed to the Pac-12, and then it didn't happen. It was true, and then it wasn't true. I mean, so the reporters got tagged for getting it wrong, but they were right at one point, and I was afraid that was going to happen to you, and all of us were going to look silly. But I didn't want Tony Altimore to be right. I just didn't. I didn't want that.
Tony. That's why when you report realignment, you got to say at this time or right now, because you're right. When you wake up in the morning, it could be completely different. It's nope, I warned you guys. I meant right now. But yeah, you're right. Guys like Tony and others, it's crazy how many people came out of the woodwork to become experts.
Yeah. I hope he's having fun with the ACC now. I'm blocked, so I can't read his tweets, but I wonder if his former employer is using him still now with a new conference. But the ACC does seem to be in a position that is untenable. I mean, I don't know how you keep members in, and you reported that the Big 12 is having those third-party talks with the ACC. I don't know how you keep members in that want to go. Look, there's going to be a settlement to this. The courts will kind of get it down the road, but eventually both parties, I would think, are going to go to the table and say, okay, this is the number. Get out of our conference. But those are such valuable brands to the ACC. It's like, yeah, I've got a bad back, so I'm going to remove my spine. It doesn't seem to work out where the ACC survives their loss.
Yeah, I don't know. If Florida State and Clemson get out, I don't see how the ACC survives. I just don't, because the other schools are going to want out right away. Like a Louisville or someone like that, they're going to see money on the other side and say, we want in. And, I just don't see a path forward unless they backfill and things like that. But then you worry about, Duke and North Carolina aren't staying in that conference to play with, whoever it may be, right. SMU and Tulane or whatever. It's just, that's not what they're doing. And so you would basically have to find a bunch of other schools to kind of backfill, because it will not stop at Florida State and Clemson.
No, I don't see any way it does. That's maybe the Big 12's hopes, but I think it's all going to unravel at some point. And just as I felt for Pac-12 fans, I feel for ACC fans. That's a proud conference that has kind of been shoved into the shadows because the SEC's gotten so dominant. They're literally the buffer between the Big Ten and SEC. It's got to be kind of a miserable life knowing you've got half the value of those two conferences when they used to be very comparable.
Yeah, I mean, now you're trying to get to third. That's just, the Big 12 is doing the same thing. You're trying to get to third, and then when you get to third, you're trying to close the gap between 2 and 3 because you're not getting to 1 anytime soon. And the ACC has a long, successful history. That's what's happened. Like the SEC and the Big Ten have pushed the rest of college athletics to the wayside, and that's why they want more say in everything. And they don't have it right now. And because of that, there's still kind of movement and some spots open. But yeah, I mean, if you're the ACC, you look at same thing as the Pac-12. You look at your history. You've had a ton of success, and you're trying to avoid being forgotten.
Yeah. Look, we've already established that things change in this environment very quickly sometimes. But if you had to put on your wizard hat, which I think you've got one probably. Your wife probably has it in the closet. You might want to go check for that wizard hat. Do you predict that the ACC survives, or do you think it'll come apart? And what's the timetable in your mind on this?
I think it comes apart, or I'll say I think the ACC, if it does survive, looks drastically different than it does now. I don't know. Maybe ESPN says, look, we'll save you, but you still got to have 12 schools, whatever, and there are 12 schools that aren't in the ACC right now. But we're still probably a year or two away from knowing. I said before, like nothing is imminent in this. It's still going to take another year. So who knows how fast or slow the courts will move, and then where will that lead to? Will it get appealed? All that stuff. I mean, we're still quite a while from knowing the future of the ACC.
Yeah, we are. Let's turn our attention to Arizona in the Big 12. After media days, what do you think your Wildcats? You should have to change your name. I'm sorry, brother. I covered the Wildcats. We were here first. You can be something else, okay? You can't even be the Bears. Hell, you can't even be the Bearcats.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're going to be. The Cacti? I'm not sure. Anyhow, I digress. How do you think these Wildcats fit into this conference?
I think they fit in well. I do. I think, looking at football media day and all that, there's a lot of confident coaches, as there always is. But, I like talking to other media members. And, the one thing I got is a lot of people are picking different teams to win the conference. Like there's a lot of parity in the league. And I feel better about there being parity than, last year we all kind of knew Oregon, Washington, we thought USC, Arizona made one of its best runs ever to become one of those teams in the mix. But every season you knew, and you said to yourself, okay, you're going to have to get through Oregon. You're going to have to get through, if you want to win the conference, you're going to have to get through these two teams. I don't, now that Texas and Oklahoma are gone, the Big 12 doesn't really have that, which isn't a bad thing. Like in an entertainment perspective, if we're a fan of Arizona, a fan of Kansas State, whatever it may be, parity's exciting in this conference, and it is absolutely there this season.
Yeah, I noticed as a person who often said, look, those two schools have not dominated this conference over the last few years. Oklahoma did for a while, but it has never been Texas dominating. But it still is weird to look at a schedule without either school on it. Those were the touchstones. Okay, you've got Oklahoma here, and you'd notice who was leading up and coming out, because there was always, you didn't want to look down the road. And Texas, it was always a big game. But without those, it's kind of, the schedule looks weird. It doesn't have those fundamental underpinnings that you kind of understood about the Big 12, but it's also real exciting to have new teams. And in a weird way, the two schools we cover, Kansas State and Arizona, will kick off the new Big 12 with a non-conference game. It's kind of weird, but it's also cool. It's going to kick off Fox Friday, which is, their new big product that they want to foist upon all of us. But that'll be the first game in that mix. It's going to be fun. It's the new conference without being a conference game. It's so odd.
Yeah, it is odd. I think Utah Baylor is in the same boat also. Arizona tried to get out of it. I know that for a fact that they said, look, we don't really want to play it if it's not a conference game. And Kansas State basically said, tough luck, which was awesome. And like, it was funny. I was talking to the AD who's no longer here, and I was like, well, have you tried this team? Have you tried that team? And he's like, they're all full. Like, we're gonna probably have to play this game. And it's interesting because it's two of the best teams in the conference. Right. And they're playing against each other, and it's the first Big 12 test for Arizona, and it's not a Big 12 game, but it's kind of a welcoming. That's what I'm looking at, a welcoming the Big 12 to saying, look, we're going to know a lot more about both teams after that game, I think.
Right. Exactly.
Especially Arizona. If Arizona could go on the road in that environment, and I think they have Utah the week after that, which is a crazy 2-game stretch. If they could come out of that even 1-1, I think the future looks bright, but yeah, I mean, they're going to be challenged pretty early there in the season, and I'm excited to see what happens.
And two incredible young quarterbacks will be on display. That's the thing I'm really fired up about, is seeing Fafita in person and how he matches up with the Big 12 defense. And of course, we're all interested to see what Avery Johnson looks like when he's really rolled out and allowed to run the offense. That's a cool matchup between two great young quarterbacks.
Yeah, it really is. And Noah's very unique. You're going to see it up close. Noah's small, right? I think people are surprised by how small he is when you see him up close. He's 5'8", at the most. But the way he controls the field, the way he sees open receivers, he gets it done. And he's a great dude, and everyone loves him. And and then Avery, I think everyone's curious to see him kind of let loose. Like you said, like, just how good is he? There's high expectations, and they're well-deserved. But, man, like, why is the coaching staff so high on him? And we're going to see him on display for a full game and a full offensive package and all that. And it's going to be really exciting.
Yeah, I agree. When the Pac-12 schools came into the Big 12, we didn't appreciate the level of quarterbacks those 4 schools were providing, at least 3 of them. It's incredible how good those 3 quarterbacks are, Sanders and Fafita and of course, Rising. It's remarkable. And they might be the 3 best quarterbacks in the Big 12. It's incredible.
Yeah, and that was the thing always with the Pac-12 is there were always good quarterbacks. I mean, you had, USC, last year you had Bo Nix and Caleb Williams, and then those 3, right? Like, it was the Pac-12 always has good quarterbacks. I'm curious to see if that carries over. But, when you take the Big 12 and position rankings and stuff and compared to other conferences, I'd put the Big 12's quarterbacks up there with any conference in America and feel great about it.
Yeah, it's crazy. You can talk about the Big 12 being the 3rd or 4th conference, but when it comes to quarterbacks, at least Kansas State, their senior left to go start at Ohio State to make room for the freshman. That was an incredible quarterback room, and now it's decimated because Avery cleared it out. Avery every scholarship quarterback left, but I'm really excited to see these quarterbacks in person and how they match up with Big 12 defenses. I've said from the very start of this whole situation, Utah was so reluctant to make this move, and I understand. I mean, they were in a great conference. They wanted that conference to survive, but I also think Utah is the most Big 12 of the schools that are coming in. They have a very engaged fan base. They just feel like a Big 12 institution. Do you notice a cultural difference between the two conferences, even though it's just the beginnings of your time in the Big 12?
I think maybe at the top, like US. I know. I mean, USC, UCLA, those schools would not fit in the Big 12. Just culturally would not happen. But other than that, like on the level of the Arizona, Colorado's, Utah, not really. Like I agree with you. I think Utah's football is going to be great in the Big 12. I think they fit in with the style of play. Now, who knows what will happen, once Kyle Whittingham retires, but they fit in great. And even in the Pac-12, they were very different than the other Pac-12 teams. There's a style that most Pac-12 teams played. Utah did not fit that mold, and that's one of the reasons why they were so successful. They play more like a Big 12 team, and I think they're set up very well for success.
Let's take another break right here, and then we'll wrap it up with our friend Jason Scheer from Wildcat Authority. I'm Fitz, and we'll be right back after this moment from our Synergy Financial Partners advertiser. That makes sense? I don't know.
We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the vision is to build the world's largest consumer financial education and empowerment company. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's return to Studio 73.
I'm Fitz, sitting in for Big B. Our guest is Jason Scheer. Jason, are you coming to Manhattan for that game?
I'm going to try to. Yeah, okay. That's the goal. My goal is eventually, like I'm kind of picking road trips year by year. I wish it was a conference game, to be honest with you. But I'm trying to pick 2 Big 12 schools away games and eventually kind of make my way around the conference.
Yeah, there's some interesting destinations. Great college towns in this conference. What are Arizona's road games?
There's BYU, Kansas State. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. The biggest one is Central Florida for their space night, which I hear is a very big deal. But what's crazy about Arizona's schedule is they miss Kansas, Iowa State, and Oklahoma State. So
not bad.
Yeah, it works out well for them.
Yeah, I've noticed that already. The schedules are perceived to be out of whack a little bit, but we don't know. Iowa State might end up being really good. West Virginia could end up being good. Hell, UCF could be really good. It's that type of conference. My friend Bud Elliott from 24/7 thinks the Big 12 should lean into sports betting quite a bit because it's going to be such a competitive, fun conference. And in fact, he even had the idea of putting, you've already got the rules person and, available to interpret penalties and things. He thinks there should be an odds person, someone tracking the prop bets on Big 12 games, which I think is kind of brilliant. I don't know if the Big 12 feels that way, but this is going to be an incredible conference to watch because you literally almost every game, you have no idea what's going to happen, except when Arizona State plays. We kind of know what's going to happen.
Brent Brennan said it well at Media Day. He said, we could beat anyone and we could lose to anyone. That's just what the conference is. Like, we're good enough to win, or everybody else is good enough to beat us too. And yeah, hopefully ASU's that doormat. There's going to be, I think there's 6 or 7 teams that I think will be separated from the others, but there's always one doormat of the conference. And I'm very curious to see who it is this year.
Yeah. Since Kansas decided to get good in football, it's hard to know. They picked themselves up and now they're a competitor. It's going to be a very entertaining year in Big 12 football. Jason, I appreciate you being on the show today. And I appreciate your reporting because sometimes standing in the middle of the hurricane doesn't feel so good, but you weathered the storm.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And thanks for all the kind words. And I can't wait. I'm excited that Arizona, it's weird. The previews are a little weird. I'll be honest, writing them and looking at other teams, but I'm very excited for the upcoming season.
That's it for this edition of the Big 12 Insiders. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode. I hope you follow along. Appreciate everyone watching.
This has been a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform.